Hello and welcome to this YouTube video about image cache with the URL cache in SwiftUI. So as a SwiftUI developer, you know that efficiently handling images and the web content is critical for providing a smooth user experience. So in this video, we will explore how to use image cache with the URL cache in SwiftUI to improve the performance and efficiency of your iOS application. So in this video, I will be covering the basics of how to use a URL cache to cache the image so that your application can run smoothly. So this is also a most common iOS interview question doing live coding as well. So before we continue, let me quickly remind you what we did last time. So we were able to actually download the data from JSON from download from a JSON API, then utilize JSON decoder, which you can find in the view model. We were able to utilize the JSON decoder to get everything into a data model. So in order to continue, as you can see, the data model right here, and here is our data model. All right. So in order to continue, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any new videos. And if you have any questions, please comment down below and I will try to answer them to the best of my knowledge. So before we start coding, let me quickly explain what is the URL cache. So basically, URL cache is a caching mechanism in Swift that caches HTTP response and the data. So including like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and other web resources. It provides a way to store and retrieve the response data for future use so that the data can be accessed quickly and efficiently without having to make a new network request. So when an application requests data from a server, a URL cache can intercept the response and cache it for later use. So this actually allows the application to quickly and easily access the data again in the future. So without having to wait for another network request to complete. So URL cache can also help you to reduce the data usage and improve the application performance by minimizing the number of network requests made by an application, or by caching the data, the application can avoid the need to actually repeatedly download the same content, which can save a lot of time and bandwidth. Okay, so before we continue diving in there, let me just quickly run this application there so you can see what we did last time. So you can see here, we were able to actually make a call and get all the data, and we have the image still there and the name, everything's still the same. You can click into it. You can see what is this thing is a apple and what's the type is a fruit, and some detailed description on this particular fruit here. But I also can see we can actually that you can see that it's pretty smooth to actually running all those stuff, but because we don't have so much data in here, and we don't have really heavy load like images or contents we need to load in this application. So when we actually run this app, everything loads pretty fast. But sometimes, as I just explained, things can get slow, or maybe file size too big, or maybe internet is slow. How we want to cache those data, so we don't constantly make an API call all the time. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and create a new layer. Let's just create it here, create a new file. Let's just call it a image repo. We're still gonna utilize the dependency injection strategy, so help us have a better decoupling and also better to help us to do unit tests in the future. So let's just call it protocol image repo interfaces. Okay, so let's start with maybe first a function. Maybe let's call it get image. Get image. We need to take in a URL since we're downloading that data from a downloaded image from a URL endpoint, and also because our view model is already parsing now a URL image URL for us. So we'll eventually utilize this to help us to download that image. So gonna be a URL. We're gonna still use async await feature from the SwiftUI. So let's call it throw. Let's return a UI image instead, and could be empty. And then let's also in order to use UI image, we also need to you can technically keep that foundation or not. We can use the UI kit here. And next one, we want to use save image. Save image, like a save image to cache. To cache, okay. We want to also pass in a URL as well. And then we might also want to pass in the data from the internet, from where we download all the informations. You may also need a response, so the URL cache can handle that. All right, next one, we definitely fetching out all the data, fetching out the image. So let's say URL, still need a URL there. We also going to use async await, so put a async throws in there. Then we call a UI image, an optional. Next, let's create a new class. Let's just call it image repo. Makes things easier. Then we kind of call image repo interfaces. Now, what we want to do is actually implement all the functions. But before we do that, we want to follow the standard practice. We want to instantiate. We want to create an instance of this class. We want to pass in some information. So let's do a private var. We want to capture the URL session because it is gonna use a URL session to download the image. Next one, we want to use a private var, and just call it cache. We're gonna use URL cache as we talked about. Next, we want to init. And for the init, we want to actually pass in a URL session. It's going to be a URL session, and we're going to give a default value too. So URL session configuration, we want to use ephemeral. Basically, it's actually a session configuration that uses a null persistent storage for cache, cookies, or credentials. Because we're going to try to handle things ourselves, we don't want some additional things that handles whatever we're trying to do here. So let's use this first. So after that, we want to pass in the cache as well. We're gonna give a default value as well. URL cache shared. Okay. So now we have this, and then we want to pass them in. So self.url session equal to URL session. Self.cache equal to cache. Next, let's start with our getting the image. Actually, let's start with the downloading first. So we want to fetch the image from the internet, right? So let's start with this. So in order to do that, it's actually pretty simple, straightforward. It's almost as similar as the network session there. So let's say we want to add then the data, then the response equal to try away URL session, the data. I believe it's a from, yes, the from URL. And after that, we want to do I'm just gonna put a symbol, a guarding here to actually check for the correctness of this connection. But in the real production, you might want to check for some more detailed potential response errors. It's really depending on what you're trying to do with your application. So let's go with a response as a HTTP URL response. And then we want to check for the HTTP response code. I believe it's our status code equal to 200. Otherwise, we want to just throw an error for now. URL error. Let's just call it a bad server response. And then afterwards, after this happens, we want to try to basically, when we download the image, because we don't have, right? So after we download it, we want to cache it. So that's where we want to utilize our caching caching mechanism. So we want to add here. We want to definitely call this a save image here. So save image to cache. We want to pass in the URL as usual. Then we'll pass in the data we called. We want to pass in the response. Technically, you could keep this save image. We don't really have to expose as a protocol. We can just keep it as private. But for now, let's just keep that way. Then we want to return a UI image. That the data come from the data. So basically, we want to download the image, we want to cache it, and we want to return to the UI level so it can be showed on the screen. Now I have to implement this save image part. So in order to save this caching, we want to create a request from the URL request. We're just going to use the URL since we just need that. Then we want to call it cached URL response equal to cache the URL response. And then we want to use the response with the data. So response and data. And after that, we want to call the cache we created earlier to actually store those cache. Store cache response. So cache response with the request that we just created. Right, so that's how we save those to the cache. Next time, so next is when we actually need to retrieve, right? Like when we want the picture, we want to say, can we check if we have it cached? If we do, let's use that. If we do not, let's make an API call and make sure we update everything. So here, basically, we want to just do a simple check here first. Basically, let's do a let request equal to, we want to create a URL request here with the URL being passed in. Right, then here we want to check, say if let, let's see if the cache exists, right? So cache the data equal to a cache, the cache we create above, then cache the response for this particular URL request. Then data. So if this cache value exists, we want to return the image that we cached. So then we pass the cache the data into it. Otherwise, we want to return try away to call fetch image with the URL that we passed in. So basically, here is actually when we don't have the cache data of the image, we will go into the fetch image, trying to download from the network, from the API. Then after we download that, of course, either you don't have the image, or you have an old one or something like that. Then it will attempt to update the cached value of the image. So you will always have a new one. And then right after that, you return that image back to the front end. So that's how we gonna use the URL cache, try to cache our images. So now we create this whole thing here. Basically, you can save to the cache. You can downloading from the internet or API, and you can get your image by checking if you have a cached image or you do not. So now we can actually go back to our view model. So here we can actually create our private var. Let's call image repo. Let's just call that when we need to call the protocols that we created for image interface. Let's keep let's keep everything and like everything like in the same style. So let's make this just normal, just interface, no interfaces. Okay, that should be good there. Okay, next one. Next thing is we want to call this image repo here. We want to follow the standard practice for dependency injection. So just in case we need to do some testing, we can easily do that. We're gonna call it empty image repo, just like the one for network session. Next, we want to assign a capture the volume. So image repo gonna be equal to image repo. Okay, so now we capture the image repo when we create this view model. Then afterwards, we can actually call another function here. So let's add a main actor, then func, say get image. Then we want to pass in the URL of the image. We're going to use async await as usual. Then we want to return a UI image. So now here, we're going to do if let image equal to try away image repo dot get image. Then we'll pass in the URL. And if we have cache, it will return the cached image. If we don't, we download from the internet. Then we'll also store that to our cache. Then we return the image. So now we want to return the image to the front and to the UI level. Then otherwise, we want to probably return maybe a default image, UI image, then system. I think it's a system name. And then we want to find a name of that. You can find anything you want. We can technically find a cannot find image. Okay, yeah, we need to use UI kit here. Okay. Now we need to return that image, and we know if we return a hard-coded image, we'll definitely have that. So we're gonna try to grab from the SF symbol we mentioned in the previous couple of videos. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so here, let's see error or maybe warning or stop sign. Anything can tell us that we don't have a data or missing question. Yeah, maybe we can do a question mark, like a question mark circle or something to show that we currently do not have a data there. Maybe let's just do this. Wait, where'd it go? Okay, let's do this one here. Let's do a question mark or circle field. So when we use that, we guarantee we always gonna have this icon here. So we can pretty much use this exclamation point here to force unwrapping this thing here. Then we can actually go back to our main cell. And then we can go back to our cell view, try to make that call there. So let's get rid of that. We don't need that right now. So originally we're passing in the item. Now we need to pass in some additional stuff. We want to pass in this view model. So in order to do that, we want to actually add a observed object as the, we can just copy the same name there. Let's just call it view model. We want to observe the changes of that particular state object. So let's say view model, var view model, and the type is a view model. So we want to see what happens here. So when that happens, okay, yeah, we also need to update this as well. Let's just create a view model here, some empty one for the preview provider. But for basically when this H stack happens, we want to do a task. Basically, when this view shows, we want to make API call. We want to potentially make API call, maybe not exact API call, but it is a asynchronous task. So let's make a do. Then we also need to another item here to capture the image as well. So let's say a stay private. Let's keep all the private stuff up here. We want a private. Actually, I want to keep the private down below. You can keep. You can put it in any order you want. So private var image. Then we're gonna call it UI image. I might complain, so might want to import the UI kit as well. Now, actually, you want to catch this image when it returns. So let's use the try away, then view model. Get image. And this URL is part of the item that we passed in. So image URL. So after that, we want to catch this if there's any error. So let's call print error.localization, localize the description. Okay, so now we have this API call. Whenever this view shows, we can try to retrieve our image. And then we need to remove this async image, even though this can be also worked. It's kind of like more like a default feature from SwiftUI. It does provide somewhat of caching, but it's a little bit different from what we did there. So you might want to remove this, but you can keep the styles there. So I'm just gonna write a new one here. So if let image, so if this image exists, but most likely it will be exist, because we know we definitely pass back a hard code image as well if we don't have anything. So we just call image. We can just use the normal Swift image class and pass in the UI image. Then you can pretty much copy every other style stuff right afterwards. Then you can remove this. And now you have this image being handled with caching. So if we run this, it should run as the same, but the performance will be way better compared to just a normal image, just display a normal image. The performance might be almost the same as the async image, but that should be okay. You don't see a huge difference until you have a huge load of data or really complicated UIs. So let me quickly run this. Oh, we're missing something here. Oh yeah, we need also passing in the view model. Okay, should be good there now. Okay. Now you can see everything download properly. And if we add a particular thing like a poll to refresh feature like that, keep loading it, those images should not have anything like a flickering to become blank then reappear again because there was like a re-downloading. Since we're at caching everything, the picture pretty much just stay the same. Do not change anything. Okay, so here basically now you might be wondering why we need to download each image separately in each cell. Instead, why don't we just download the whole thing at once at the beginning when we show up this list, right? Like maybe downloading this content view. When we here have a get API data, why don't we just download here? Well, let me explain that. So basically in iOS, it's actually often necessary to download images separately for each of those cells in a table view or a collection view or a list in our case. You can see here. This is because loading and displaying images can be a resource-intensive task, especially if you are dealing with large images or a large number of images. Like I said, if you have a lot of data, you can definitely see the advantage of having the cached image there. But if you were to download all of the images for a table view or collection view up front, then you could end up using a lot of memory and slowing down the overall performance of your app. So that's why it's actually usually better to only download the images that are needed for the currently visible cells, like those here, or anything still down below, but if anything off the screen, we don't need to worry about them at the time until they show up on the view. And then download the more images as users scroll through the list. So basically overall, the downloading images separately for each cell is actually common practice in the iOS development, and it's an effective way to ensure that your app remains responsive and efficient. Okay, so pretty much here is all the examples that for the downloading the images and utilizing the caching with the URL cache. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed learning about the image cache with the URL cache in SwiftUI. So before you go, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any new videos. And I will see you next time, and happy coding.